Story 1. Quicksand and Wolves. I did not live in a place where either of these were even close to being an actual problem. Story 2. I was really worried that no one was doing anything about the Bermuda Triangle, and I was scared when flying because I thought, what if my plane got lost and flew toward it? Story 3. I was far more afraid of the window at night. I insisted my blinds be down because I was afraid that was where I would see the monster. I thought, you other kids are naive. Monsters aren't going to fit under our beds or in our closets. They obviously come from outside. Story 4. The T-Rex from Jurassic Park was under my bed. My father, a World War II veteran, was tucking me in one night when he was babysitting. I told him how scared I was. He looked at me and said, "You're too smart to think a dinosaur could fit under your bed. Good night." He turned off my lights and left without another word. 5-year-old me was shamed into bravery that night. Story 5. To be killed by a lady with a giant sword. I couldn't sleep in my own bed because of her. I slept underneath it, with bugs laying eggs in my brain and the darkness surrounding me. Story 6. I believed I would die at the age of 25. I don't know where that thought came from, but it haunted me constantly until I eventually accepted it. Then it didn't happen. I am 34 now. However, my brother died at 25. Story 7. I was terrified of the flesh-eating bugs from the mummy. I thought they would come out of the ground and get me at any moment. Story 8. Whenever we drove past factories with tubes or pipes connecting the buildings, I was convinced I would one day end up inside one. I mentally prepared myself for how I would have to crawl through them. Story 9. Catfish not being catfished refers to the actual fish. I refused to swim in lakes because of it. I think it's because my older brother had a big stuffed animal of one, and I believed that was their actual size. Story 10. I don't know where it came from, but I was very worried about Darth Vader reaching up through the toilet and grabbing me. Story 11. I was afraid of the police and social services because my mother told me they would lock me in the station's basement to be harmed if I didn't do anything she said. Story 12. I was obsessed with knowing how to open my bedroom window and would call for my mom after bedtime to make her physically show me again how to open it because I was convinced our house was going to burn down every night. Story 13. Getting hit and dying because of a stray bullet. For added context, I was born and raised in the Philippines. Story 14. In kindergarten, I would watch for the school bus to drive up our road, and I would cry. I was afraid to get on that bus. Story 15. The sound of flushing the toilet at night has become a habit for me to cover my ears, and it continues to affect me to this day. Story 16. I had a great fear of being picked up by a tornado or swept away by the raging waters of a hurricane. I live in Texas and I was 8 or 9. Don't judge me. Story 17. Looking down underwater in any body of water still freaks me out, even when I'm playing a video game like Ark. Story 18. My grandmother was extremely religious, to the point that I thought Jesus would appear in my room at night. I don't even know why that scared me, but it did. I was pretty young, around 7. Story 19. I wouldn't call it fear, but rather an aversion to buttons like those found on shirts and blouses. This aversion persists at 26 years old. It's a complex topic with varying degrees of dislike for different types and sizes of buttons in various situations. It also includes mechanisms that resemble buttons but are not traditional buttons. I could elaborate on this topic for pages. If you want to know more about my unusual phobia, feel free to ask. Story 20. I would jolt awake as I was falling asleep and think I was waking up on the Titanic with water rising outside my bedroom window, or that I was waking up in Pompeii. I had to listen to a certain CD every night as I fell asleep because as long as the music was playing, it meant I couldn't possibly wake up on the Titanic. 20 years and an obsessive-compulsive disorder diagnosis later, here I am. Story 21. When I was around 4 or 5 years old in the late 1980s, I was terrified that Bebop and Rocksteady from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were hiding under my bed and would come to get me while I slept. Story 22. A random black hole is appearing and destroying the Earth. It is not so much irrational as it is improbable. Story 23. I used to be extremely scared of walking up the stairs at night because of a horror film my sister made me watch when I was younger. Story 24. As a young child, when I learned at school that the country I live in is below sea level, I slept in a life vest and a cardboard box for a while because I was scared our house would flood at night and I would drown. We lived on the fourth floor, not near any water. I found out years later that my parents never knew why I chose to sleep that way but just let me because kids are unpredictable. I still remember how annoying the cardboard cutting into my neck was, even though the life vest helped a little. Story 25. Getting hit in the face or things zipping past my head remind me of when I took a soccer ball to the face in 6th grade from an 8th grader, which was a complete accident. I blacked out for a second and thought I had broken my nose because I caught a whiff of blood when the ball bounced off my face. I haven't played soccer since then. I am still nervous about things flying past my head, but I don't flinch as much as I used to. Story 26. I was terrified of shaving because you could cut yourself. However, by the time I was old enough to shave, I overcame the fear. Story 27. Automatic toilets at gas stations during road trips, bathrooms at airports, concert venues, and anywhere else with automatic toilets were a nightmare for me as a child. I was perfectly fine with either wetting my pants or holding it until I got home, no matter how painful it was for my bladder. But I eventually got over it. My poor mom. Story 28. We used to live on the 7th floor of our apartment building and dry our clothes by hanging them on some loose wires outside the window. Whenever it got windy, I was afraid the wind would carry our clothes away, and sometimes I worried our house would collapse because of it. One time, I almost fell out of the window while trying to retrieve all the clothes. I'm still a bit scared now, but I guess clothes aren't everything. Story 29. Lifts or elevators for you Americans have taken me years to get used to. I would almost pass out from fear as a child. Story 30. That Satan would come up through the floor, grab me, and take me back down to hell with him. I guess my actually dying wasn't part of the equation. Story 31. Not so irrational, but I had a fear of a bomb blast killing me in my bed. I live in Northern Ireland, so... Story 32. In the late 1970s, I watched a famous television show where a man was working on the foundation of his house and got trapped beneath it. It was very intense drama. The old farmhouse I grew up in had a trapdoor in the cellar to access the well plumbing. My dad would pull up the hatch and work on the dark, drippy pipes. It was damp, black, and muddy, and smelled like a cave. Sometimes he would be down in the pit, and I would lose sight of him. My fear was that he would get trapped or stuck down there. It is traumatic to even type this. Story 33. A fox is hiding in my cupboard. I still have an irrational fear of open cupboard doors, although I am no longer scared that a fox is hiding inside. Story 34. Boys were peeking into the bathroom window while I was using it. The bathroom was on the 2nd floor and I lived on a rural farm. Story 35. Elmo and other stuffed dolls. I had a line of dolls that rested in a little cubby near the ceiling in my room growing up. One day, I had a fever and became paranoid about the dolls. I fell asleep and woke up to the feeling of something grabbing my legs. I looked down and saw my Elmo doll biting my legs. I couldn't move. I just had to watch Elmo bite me. He eventually slid down the back of my bed, and I could start moving. I looked, and Elmo was still where he should have been, in the cubby near my ceiling. I swear my legs were actually in pain. I realized later that I had hallucinated it, probably due to my illness and medication. But I kept Elmo in the closet for years after that. Story 36. Sharks in the pool, tub, drain. I was a naive child living in Michigan. We don't even have sharks here. Story 37. Being stuck in a supermarket after closing time and being left in line at the checkout. Story 38. The drain in pools. The bigger the drain, the more scared I was of it. I never saw that scene in Final Destination until I was a teenager. Story 39. Shaving the face with cream resulted in more hair growth. It turns out that was a misconception, and as the massive trans-feminine individual I was back then, increased masculinity was detrimental to my fragile sense of security. Story 40. In my first year at school, I thought the loud toilet would trigger the fire alarm. I left many toilets unflushed. Story 41. I used to be obsessed with tornadoes. I was born and raised in California, where there are hardly any twisters, yet I would still make tornado shelters. One day, I remember watching a show where the host said, "You can tell what the weather is going to be just by looking up at the sky." Well, 6-year-old me understood that as whatever shape the clouds made in the sky was going to determine the weather. One particularly stormy day, I saw a cloud in the shape of a twister and proceeded to panic. I refused to step outside, gathered my emergency bag and radio, and sprinted to my shelter. My poor parents, in the middle of running errands, were perplexed by my sudden disappearance. My dad had to spend a long 2 hours dealing with my crying to resolve the situation and teach me the error of my ways. Story 42. I would be raked. I didn't know what rape was, and I heard confusing information from adults and the news. I literally thought they were saying raked, leading to an irrational fear of a gardening tool. Story 43. I slept in the master bedroom with my family, which was a really large room with a lot of empty space. I was scared of Jeff the killer crawling up the 2-story house to get me. I was scared of Freddy from Five Nights at Freddy's popping out of the bathroom or other doors. Slender Man appeared in the middle of the bedroom. My parents' unusually large wedding photo seemed haunted and was coming to get me. I forgot the rest. Story 44. My mother would stand me on a chair next to the kitchen sink, and I would bend over toward the sink so she could wash my hair. I was afraid I would fall down the drain and be eaten by the disposal. Story 45. I was 10 years old in 1979, and thanks to the news, I was afraid Skylab was going to fall from the sky and harm me. Story 46. A monster would drag me to the dream world by the ankles as I tried to get into bed. Thank you, Disney. Don't look under the bed definitely caused anxiety up to high school. Story 47. Drowning. I was a national champion in synchronized swimming and disliked it, but my mom wouldn't let me quit. Story 48. I was scared that the rapture would happen while I was naked and Jesus would judge me in front of all the other Christians. I am an atheist now. Story 49. I used to call my mother's office after she got home to question her coworkers and ensure that the woman in my house was actually my mother and not someone pretending to be her. Story 50. Whenever I needed to use the toilet at night, I had to sprint back to bed as soon as I flushed and be back under the covers before the toilet finished audibly refilling. Otherwise, the imaginary crocodiles in my room would decide to have their king eat me alive. Funnily enough, these imaginary crocodiles were also very friendly and playful with their words as long as I was back in bed in time. Story 51. I cannot bite into a piece of fruit, especially an apple, for fear of eating a worm. I need to cut it up. This fear has followed me throughout my life. Story 52. I feared being pulled into the old ceiling fan at the top of the stairs. To be fair, it was a very industrial-looking metallic mid-century whole house fan. Story 53. I thought that telling someone I hated them would make them suffer. I believe my mom told me that after I said that to my sister, but I was so scared that to this day I still don't say bad things about people in case something happens to me or them in retaliation. Story 54. I thought my mom would be eaten by crocodiles on her way home from work. We live in a city. Actually, now that I think about it, there are no crocodiles in my country at all. I blame it on the internet. Story 55. There used to be a show similar to Cops, but it featured emergency medical technicians and was called Rescue 911. When I was younger, I saw an episode about carbon monoxide poisoning, and I became terrified of this odorless, invisible gas potentially harming everyone while we slept due to our appliances and heating and air conditioning systems. Story 56. Imagine a group of ninjas or black operatives breaking into our home and murdering my family at night. Story 57. When I was little, I would lie in bed and worry that someone would set our house on fire during the night. I have no idea where this thought came from. Story 58. That something would chew off my fingers and toes if they stuck outside my blanket at night. Also, the monsters of the night would notice if I were awake in bed and would kill me. I would pretend to be asleep as soon as I turned off the lights. Story 59. Volcanoes. When I was young, my family lived in a large country house on the side of a mountain. In the kitchen and living room windows, we had a beautiful view of another mountain with a jagged top resembling a sleeping volcano. I used to have nightmares about these mountains erupting during the night and engulfing the house in lava. Now that I am in my 40s, I am pretty sure I will have another one of those nightmares tonight just because I have written about them. Story 60. I had an irrational fear of going to the bathroom because I was afraid of a meteor falling on it and killing me. Yes, this fear was exclusive to the bathroom. Why? I don't know. It was probably the fear of dying naked or something like that. Story 61. When I was about 20 years old, I was very afraid of making money. I was in a good phase, but I couldn't cope with the fact that I was already earning more than anyone in my family at such a young age. In the end, this led to my ruin and affected me psychologically. Story 62. Every time there was a thunderstorm, I was afraid that a tornado would occur. I was also scared of the 2012 end-of-the-world prediction. I would lie awake at night, anxious. Story 63. Tornadoes. I lived in an area with mountains and far from Tornado Alley, yet I would have recurring nightmares about them. Story 64. Mice were eating my feet while I slept. When my grandfather told me about trench foot, he didn't mention that the feet were usually already semi-dead. And when the rats ate them, the soldiers had no feeling. I honestly thought I would just wake up one day and discover I had no feet. Story 65. The closet door is open. I don't know why. Maybe it's the boogeyman. I'm okay now, but I still prefer the closet door to be closed. Story 66. Quicksand felt as though it could swallow me up at any moment, whether I was on my way to school or outside a store. Story 67. Monsters in the toilet. To this day, I am scared of escalators. I cannot even look at one without feeling sick. Story 68. I was always paranoid that I had a blood clot in my leg when I was a little girl. Guess who has a clotting disorder? My fears were valid. I just had no idea. I ended up getting deep vein thrombosis and a pulmonary embolism before they figured it out. Story 69. A tsunami. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I kept hearing that a tsunami could completely cover the island. I would lie awake at night. Story 70. I have always been afraid of the dark, yet I am a fan of horror. I do not like fireworks and balloons because they pop, and I am sensitive to sound. Story 71. My uncle lived next to a railway line, and every time a train passed, the house would shake. I truly thought the house would collapse with my family and me inside. Story 72. Younger could mean yesterday. Nuclear weapons are starting to become a concern again after a few decades of relative calm. This might not be an irrational fear, though. I cannot recall having an irrational fear. I think having one indicates that you are doing okay. Some of us faced real fears. I grew up in a troubled environment. My dad's friend turned out to be a serial killer. I faced abuse and have autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Oh wait, I was worried about going to hell. That took until I was 12 to resolve. Story 73. Roller coasters make me feel scared, even though I know the chances of something happening are very low. There's something about the combination of height and speed that I dislike. I can handle speed and height separately, but together they make me uncomfortable. Maybe it's the feeling of not being in control. I'm not entirely sure why I feel this way. Story 74. A tornado is threatening my life. I lived right by the ocean. We typically experience hurricanes, not tornadoes. I have actually slept through multiple hurricanes. Story 75. Ebola. I was convinced it posed a significant threat, and I expected emergency responders to arrive at any moment. My house was on fire, and I needed a plan to escape. I blame my school for that. Story 76. Also, Bloody Mary. I was terrified to look in a mirror for more than a second without thinking. Don't think about it repeatedly. Story 77. One day, I suddenly realized I might become a homeless child and have to sleep in the cold. Even though I grew up in a wealthy family, I used to see homeless children while walking home, and I felt pity for them. I feared that I could end up in the same situation. I would observe how they found food or made money, just in case I ever needed to do the same in the future. Sometimes, I still feel scared about this possibility. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.